Let's make my Medal of Honor quilt pattern using Kindred fabrics from Art Gallery Fabrics. Medal of Honor is perfect for a 42 count jelly roll or even a 42 count layer cake, plus 1 yard of background fabric. Now do note, if you want to make a block that is one single print as shown on this video's thumbnail, you will need to have a pre-cut bundle that has 2 of each print, or an even number of each print. Otherwise, you will have to make the scrappy version, which I will show you in today's video. But anyways, let's get started. For your 1 yard background fabric, you will subcut 80 2.5 inch squares and 80 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles. If you are using a jelly roll strip, which is a 2.5 inch by width of fabric, you will subcut 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch rectangles, 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles, and 2.5 inch squares. You can also keep your jelly roll strip folded in half just to save some time on cutting. Now, if you prefer to use a layer cake, which is a 10-inch square, you will subcut 2.5 inch strips, and then with those strips, you will then subcut them into 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch rectangles, 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles, and 2.5 inch squares. Here is the difference in the fabric waste between the two. You will have less waste with a 10-inch square shown here on the right, and here on the left is the jelly roll strip. Now the jelly roll strip has a bonus though, because if you create crumb quilts, then you can use this waste for potentially those other projects, whereas the layer cake, they are very thin, so you would honestly most likely throw them away. But whichever you prefer, you will just repeat this step to all of the 42 count jelly roll or 42 count layer cake, whichever you preferred. But once everything is cut, you will select 1 2.5 inch square and 1 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch background fabrics. And within your print, you will select 1 2.5 inch square, 2 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles, and 1 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch rectangles, all within the same print. Then with both your print and background 2.5 inch squares, you will draw a line from corner to corner at a 45-degree angle. Then with your print 2.5 inch square, you will place it right sides together, like so, on your background 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangle, and please pay close attention to the line direction. This is very important. Then with your background 2.5 inch square, you will place it like so, right sides together, on your print 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangle, and once again pay close attention to the line direction as well, since it's going to go in the opposite direction. And once you have that done, you will then sew directly on that line that you just drew. We are using an old school method. Then afterwards, you can use either a pair of fabric scissors or a rotary cutter and trim a 1/4 inch away from that line that you just sewn. Then with those 2 units that we just created, go ahead and sew them together. Then we are going to build this block like a log cabin by adding the same print in a 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangle to the right side of our new unit, followed by the print 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch rectangle to the top of our unit to complete a 6.5 inch quilt block. Then all you have to do is repeat these steps until you have made a total of 80 quilt blocks. Once all of your mini blocks are completed, if your pre-cut had 2 of the same prints, or at least an even number of all of your prints, you can create the same print block by selecting 4 mini blocks in the same print, and you'll just rotate your blocks 90 degrees to form a pinwheel-like star. Then all you have to do is sew your blocks together to form rows, and then sew your rows together to complete a 12.5-inch block. Or you can go the scrappy route, which is just select 4 in different prints and then create the same block layout, but of course in a scrappier version. But either way, go ahead and take your pick, and you'll repeat this step until you have made a total of 20 quilt blocks. Then once all of those blocks are completed, all you have to do is lay them out side by side in a 4x5 block layout. Then, as always, you will sew your blocks together to form rows, and then lastly, sew your rows together to complete your quilt top. And here is what my quilt top looks like all complete. For the backing, I am using a coordinated print from within the collection, and for the thread, I am going with glide threads in the color linen. And here is what my quilt looks like all complete. For the quilting, I went with a more traditional route by using fabulous feathers, but I do hope you have enjoyed today's tutorial. If you could please take a moment to hit that like and subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you can be notified for your next amazing quilt project.